right. Well, my name is Rick. I'm one of the pastors here. I want to welcome you all to church this morning. I'm glad you made it. It is a beautiful morning to continue our series that we started a few weeks ago on the life of Simon Peter. And we're going to learn a little bit about Simon and how his life is like ours. But when you dig into the Gospels and you look at and you learn from the life of Simon, you realize that you can't really learn a lot about him and Jesus without learning a lot about ourselves. Isn't it cool to think that those people, those ancient peoples from so long ago, they were just like us? And this is what we're here to do, is to learn about them and how they are much like us. Now, Peter's life, I don't know how many of you have been here for the whole series, but he's just a regular guy. He's a flawed, simple man, has a regular job, had a regular life, and then he meets Jesus. But he had these flaws, and he's trying so desperately and so hard to be faithful. And I think sometimes that's a lot like us. That describes us, isn't it? We're just flawed, regular people who are struggling, trying to be faithful followers of Christ. So last week we looked at how 1 minute, excuse me, just a sec, can you turn me down just a touch? I'm like echoing really bad in here. I don't know if it's, unless you guys just want to hear me twice, it's awesome. So, so we're a flawed, we were flawed just like Peter. But last week we looked at Peter and how 1 minute Jesus is like, man, you're awesome, Peter. You're the rock. I'm going to build my church on you. And then the very next minute, he's like, Peter, dude, get away from me. You are a stumbling block. 1 minute, he's like this really faithful, the rock. And the next minute, he's a stumbling block, flawed and faithful. So as we go through the scriptures today and this message, I want you guys to take some notes, because this stuff is important. Write it down. It may be for you, or it may be for a coworker or a friend or somebody at home that needs to hear this message, but write it down and use the study guide. That study guide has been put together, and I'm loving it because it's made for us to use as an individual study, or we can dig into God's word as a life group, as a family, with our friends and coworkers. And that's really important, that you guys dig into God's word. Don't just take my word for it. Don't take any pastor's word for it. You guys need to read what God has to say to you, and he will speak to you through those scriptures. That's what I love about this church. So last week, Jesus and the disciples were in this town called Caesarea Philippi, which is in the northern part of Israel. And they're up there and they're hanging out, they're doing their thing. But then they go to what's called the Mount of Transfiguration. Now, we're not really sure which mountain it was. That's really not a big deal. But they go to the mountain. Jesus takes all the disciples and he goes to the bottom of the mountain. And he tells most of them to wait, but he takes Peter and John and James, and they go to the top with him. Now, this is where it gets kind of sci-fi-ish, if you like to look at the Bible that way a little bit, but it gets where he goes up to the top of the mountain and Jesus starts to become light. He's up there and he's praying. This supernatural thing happens. It changes. And well, Luke puts it this way. He says, as he was praying, the appearance of his face changed and his clothes became bright as a flash of lightning. Jesus transfigures into this being of light. And that's not all that happens. All of a sudden, Elijah, the Old Testament prophet, pops up and appears there. And Moses, he appears there. We're like, what's going on? What's happening here? Well, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. And he knows, or at least he thinks he knows, that it's that time. He knows that he's going to be captured. He knows that he's going to be tortured. And he knows that he's going to die. So he goes to the top of this mountain to kind of check in and pray to God. And it's probably pretty realistic to understand that Elijah, one of the most well-known Old Testament prophets, is there. And so this powerhouse, Moses of the Old Testament, right? These two guys are there. They've been up there with God. And it's like, yeah, Jesus, it's time, brother. It's time. Game on, right? You ever get that feeling like game on? I do sometimes when I get ready to step up on the stage. It's like, oh, but hopefully you guys aren't going to crucify me. But so they tell him it's time, and Peter sees all of this. And Peter, we've been talking about for a couple of weeks that he's not one to keep his mouth shut. He's not one to be like, no, man. But Peter gets excited. And he sees how Jesus looks, and he sees Moses, and he sees Elijah, these Old Testament superheroes from his, old days, right? And he's like, this is awesome. I'm going to build you guys some huts, and we're just going to stay here, and it's going to be amazing. I can't wait to just stay up here. But God interrupts him. Speaking through the cloud of light, God says this to him, this is my son, marked by my love, focus of my delight. Listen to him. And I think sometimes when I read stuff like that. I know God's talking to them, but God's talking to us. This is my son, focus of my delight. Listen to him. I think Peter and James and John, they needed to see this happen, this supernatural event, to realize who Jesus is and understand what's going on, because they're getting ready to go through some dark times. After all of this, right up until the crucifixion, they're going to have some dark days right before the resurrection. And I think these guys really needed to see that, to feel that, to know what's going on. But Peter, he wants to stay up there. He's with Jesus, and Jesus is this being of light, and it's, oh my gosh, it's amazing. We're going to stay. But you see, Jesus is like, look, man, we got to go back. And I think that reminds me of the times that we've had these mountaintop experiences, right? Have you guys been there where you go to some conference or you do something and you're excited and you're full of the Spirit? You just want to stay in that moment. And it's exciting, and I love it. I've had a few of those moments too, but this is Jesus telling him, we can't stay at this mountaintop experience. We are supposed to go. It's meant to inspire you. It's to inspire us to go and share what we've learned in this light out into the world. That's the whole idea of this, is we have these mountaintop experiences, and then we go and we share it with the world. I've had a few of these experiences myself with God where, I used to love it when I was a youth pastor and I'd take the youth groups to these conferences, and they have the rock and roll bands up there and they're jamming and the kids are jumping up and down and you just feel the Spirit. It's probably how I hurt my knee and my back. But anyway, you're out there jumping up and down and really getting into it, right? I've had those experiences there. I've had those experiences here on Sunday morning, sitting right on the front row. It is awesome to be this close to the stage. I don't know if you guys all want to scooch up one row, because when you sing, nobody can hear anybody. I sound like Nate when I sing down here. It's amazing. But, but I've had those experiences, sometimes in prayer and meditation, where I do not want to leave that moment. But if I stayed in those moments, I would have missed what those moments were there to prepare me for. Those moments are to prepare us for real life, to prepare us to go and serve, to love our neighbor as ourselves, right? That's what it's for. It's so that we can go and tell people what we learned and what we heard. You have to come down off that mountain. So, Jesus, Peter, and Johnson and James, John and James, they leave. They leave the top of the mountain and they head for Jerusalem. Now, they're heading to Jerusalem to have what's known as the Last Supper. Now, Jesus knows it's the Last Supper, but all his disciples, they have no clue. They don't realize this. They don't know. So they get there. Here's another in the gospel, another glimpse of Peter, what we learn from that. You see, they're there to celebrate the Passover meal. And they're making arrangements for this meal to be up on the second story, the upper room where you get that devotional, the upper room. That's kind of where they got that idea. They have this this meal in the upper room. Now, Peter, he's the one who goes and gets this all ready and prepares it all. So they are getting ready for this, but I want to remind you something too. When back in those days, they walked everywhere, unless you were rich enough to have a donkey or a cart or whatever. For the most part, people walked everywhere. They were not roads like we have today. They're dusty roads. They're dirty roads. So when it was dry, their feet were all dirty and dusty. When it was wet, they were all nasty and muddy. They had these dirty feet. It was just terrible looking. I know there's a picture up behind me, but I'm not looking. It's gross. So when you arrived at a home, typically you'd kick off your sandals and there'd be a servant there, whoever their lowest servant was, and he would wash the feet. And then they'd go in. Well, in this upper room, there are no servants. It's just the disciples and Jesus. The first disciple walks in and he's like, oh, my feet are nasty. And he sees the bowl and he's like, now, if I've been down and washed my feet, guess who's going to be washing everybody's feet? I'm out. He just keeps going, right? And guess what all the other disciples do? They all do the exact same thing. They walk right by the bowl and they go sit down and they're getting ready to eat. They have this little discussion. They're kind of arguing, actually, about what's going to happen. And I think the argument was about who was going to wash whose feet. And I bet Peter, Peter, he can't miss a moment. He's probably like, hey, one of you guys needs to go get that bowl and wash our feet. And they're like, whatever, arguing who's the greatest is what they're arguing about, who should be first, who should be last, and all of that. Jesus walks in and he knows what's going on. He doesn't say a word. He walks in, looks at the bowl, takes off his coat, rolls up his sleeves, grabs the bowl, comes over to the disciples and sits down and starts washing their feet. That's crazy. The student is the one who's supposed to be washing feet, right? The teacher does not wash the students' feet. The master does not wash the disciples' feet. Just remember this, these guys had just been up on the mountain and they know who Jesus is. He's the anointed one, the Messiah, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, is kneeling down, washing their feet. And number one disciple, nobody says nothing. Next disciple doesn't. He goes all down the line. Nobody says nothing. They're just like, hey, go ahead. Thanks, Jesus. But guess what? Gets to Peter. What does Peter do? He speaks up, whoa, 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 Jesus, you will never wash my feet. You're not going to wash my feet. No way am I going to let you. You're the Lord of Lords. And he's washing the toe jam out of these guys' toes. That's not happening, Jesus. You're not washing my feet. And Jesus says, if I don't wash you, you can't be a part of what I'm doing. You can't be a part of what I'm doing. Afterwards, Jesus looks at them and says, look, if you want to be great, you're going to serve. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Remember? You're going to serve. Jesus is showing us how to serve. He says, you got to be willing to do the dirty job. You got to be willing to do the stuff that's humbling and sometimes even humiliating. It's crazy. I love it when we get together and we do serve stuff out in the world. Hearts and Hammers. We go out and build decks and stuff. Just not too long ago, we just did that. We went out in the community here and we did weed eating and painting and mowing on this nasty hot day. I remember I was just dying out there. So some of you, where they at? I saw somebody in the audience. They were out there mowing grass and just ran out of water. And here I am over painting, just chilling like, oh my gosh, they're going to die. So luckily somebody brought them some water. But it's a hot, dirty job, right? And we just did it. Isn't that awesome to be able to go out and serve? But I believe that it's through service where we can experience and share and show the love of Christ. It is in serving others where that happens the most, I think. That's just my opinion. But, sometimes these jobs, they may not be very glamorous jobs. I mean, sometimes some of the stuff we have to do is nasty. I mean, when Ben was in charge around here, guess who was scrubbing the toilets a lot? I know some of you guys volunteered before I had volunteers. Guess who was scrubbing toilets? It's not very glamorous sometimes. It's not. That's why I know. On Monday nights, you just saw that, we got to baptize 2 people at Celebrate Recovery. That's amazing. I volunteer on Monday nights to help be a part of that Celebrate Recovery Ministries. And sometimes there's other opportunities to volunteer. On Thursday mornings, I volunteer over here at the school, and that's an easy job. It's 20 minutes from 7:40 to 8 a.m. I open the doors and I high-five kids. And it's to see those smiles on their faces, it's amazing. You should try it sometime. There are 5 days they go to school, Monday, Wednesday. I got Thursday. You guys pick a day. No, you guys can come and help me anytime. But it's amazing to be a part of that, to volunteer. That Celebrate Recovery stuff, sometimes it's not so amazing. We're digging down deep into the depths of someone's hurts and their habits and their hangups. It's not fun sometimes because a lot of these guys have some of the same issues that I had or have. And it brings up some of my own struggles. And it's hard. But I do that because of what we just talked about. Jesus washed the disciples' feet. The King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. He was willing to wash the toe jam out of somebody's feet. We believe here at St. Paul's, there's one of this, we have statements of our culture. And one of them is we believe that the staff should lead the way in serving, that we should be the first ones to pick up trash, pull weeds, and even clean up poop. I know that's kind of weird and gross to have up there, but it's happened. And we don't get paid to do that kind of stuff. But we do these things to model what Jesus did so that maybe you'll start doing these things. I believe you, in the military, I really looked at you lead by example. So that's why I volunteer. And not so much for you guys, but it's for me. I get to experience Christ. I see the kids' faces. I see people like Willie and Brandon get baptized at Celebrate Recovery. Those are awesome, awesome times. So serving. It's one of the 5 key practices. Remember we just talked about 5 keys, 5 things we need to do every week. It's a good reminder of find ways to serve communally together inside the church and outside the church. Do things in your community to make a difference. Find ways to show kindness 5 times a day. Remember I think we talked about how the Sunday crowd from churches are the worst tippers. If you guys are going to go out to eat, it's getting close to the holiday season, think about 50% tip. Think about 100% tip. Do that once in a while. Now everybody's going to go order like a Happy Meal. But, but think about that sometimes. Be the best tippers out there. So the next glimpse we get of Simon Peter is during this meal. Jesus is sitting at the table and they're eating and they're having a good time, I bet. And they got to, do communion together. We talk about that on Communion Sundays. This is where they had communion together, and he breaks the bread and blesses the wine and all that. But then he says something that freaks them all out. He says that tonight, one of you is going to betray me. One of you is going to betray me. And they're like, oh, no way. Don't be so shocked. They're freaking out. But what they don't know is that Judas Iscariot, the guy, right, he's already gotten paid. He's already done the deed, right? He's gone out, got the money. He told them how he's going to do it and where they're going to be later. He says, just follow me. But see, Jesus is like, don't be so shocked. Yeah, one of you is going to betray me, but the rest of you, you're going to desert me. You're going to beat feet and be gone in my moment of need. You're going to run. And this is where Simon Peter's like, whoa, 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 Jesus. Even if everyone else deserts you, I will never desert you. These other guys might bail, not me. I'm Peter. I'm the rock. I'm the one you built the church on. I'm the guy, right? I'm the man. I will never desert you. I'm your wingman, Jesus. I'll go anywhere with you. That's how it's going to be, right? This is Peter. I'm the rock. And Jesus is like, I'll tell you the truth, Peter. This very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny 3 times that you even know me. Peter insisted, even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you. Let me ask you a question. Do you think Simon Peter meant what he said that night? I think he did. I think he was sincere, 100%. I will never leave you. What I don't think he didn't realize is they didn't know how soon this was going to happen. I mean, it's going to happen tonight. You see, Jesus and the disciples, after they were wrapping up this Passover meal, and they would normally sing a hymn or something, Psalm 118. That's the give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. I think there's some Caleb songs that got some of that scripture into. Sometimes we sing hymns here and we sing that song together too. But it's dark, and they leave the upper room, and they're heading out down the path. And right to the left is the Jewish temple. They walk down through the Kidron Valley. They come to the other side of this valley. It's probably about a 30-minute walk. A little cardio after dinner. It's great. But you go out there, and here they go. This is Jesus' favorite spot to pray, the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus takes these disciples, and he's like, hey, most of you wait here. You 3 come with me, Peter, James, and John, coming a little farther. He says, I need to pray, but I want you guys to wait here by this tree here, and I want you to stay awake. I want you to pray. Pray with me. And then Jesus goes a little farther and prays by himself. This is the night or the place where he prays that prayer, that Father, take this cup from me, but not my will, but your will be done. You guys remember that? It's in Matthew. So he goes and he prays, and then he gets up and he goes back to check on the disciples. What are the disciples doing? Exactly. They're out. Snoozing. He's like, hey, wake up, come on. Can't you guys just pray with me for a little bit? And Jesus goes back to pray. Goes back to pray again, and the drops of blood, that's how much anguish. He's scared, he's afraid, he doesn't know, he knows what's going to happen, he knows what to expect. He's really praying hard. I mean, how hard do you have to pray where drops of blood come out of your forehead? That just freaks me out a little bit. Anyway, so he's praying, but then he goes back. What are they doing? They're out again. Snooze. Come on, wake up, guys, wake up. Can't you pray with me? Can't you be there with me? Come on. This is why I think, I don't blame these guys for falling asleep. I really don't, because it's late, I'm tired, whatever. I see some of you guys fall asleep while I'm preaching. I don't know what that says, but it happens, right? I know, I get it, I'm tired. Sometimes I'm sleepy and working on these sermons, and I feel like I'm going to nod off. But the 3rd time, Jesus comes back, and again, they're asleep. He's like, wake up. Look, my betrayers are here. So it's too late. They slept through the whole opportunity to pray for Jesus in that moment. My betrayers are here. Judas is leading this group of guys, these temple guards, to Jesus. They have clubs and swords and who knows what else, torches and stuff, and axes. Well, probably not axes. Maybe. Who knows? But Judas walks right up to Jesus, and he does what? Kisses him. Gives him a kiss. He betrays Jesus with a kiss. And at this moment, Peter realizes, here's Peter again, right? Peter realizes what's going on, and he whips out a sword, takes a swipe at this dude, one of the guards. And this is what they tell about it here. John says this. He says, just then Simon Peter, who was carrying a sword, pulled it from his sheath and struck the chief priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. Malchus was his name. Now, all four Gospels tell us that this happened, but only John tells us that Simon Peter is the one who was packing. Imagine that packing. He's carrying a weapon, right, that night. And he lops off this guy's ear. Can you imagine that? This tells me two things. One is that who does this with a mob with all these torches and clubs and swords, and there's only you're the only one that's got a sword? Who does that? It's a death wish, right? To start swinging when this crowd is there. So Peter is willing to die. That's number one. Number two thing it tells me is that Peter's not a very good shot. He's not. He's a fisherman. He's not a soldier. So he whiffed is what I think, but it doesn't say whiffed in there. I don't know if they called it that. But and Jesus turns to Peter and he says this. Put away your sword. Those who use the sword will die by the sword. Don't you realize that I could ask my Father for thousands of angels to protect us, and he would send them instantly? Jesus is like, I've been telling you guys for weeks this is going to happen. Do you not listen? It's like, is this on? Hello? Jesus is like, come on. Why do you guys not pay attention? Put away your weapon. And this is one of my favorite parts. Jesus, it's only a Jesus move. It really is. And I don't know that I would do this, or maybe you guys would, but he walks over and he picks the guy's ear up. And he goes up to him. I can imagine him going, hold still. Right? Slap that guy's ear right back on. Healed him. Who does that, right? Who does that? But Jesus. Peter's probably like, sorry, puts his sword back. I can see it. So he heals him. And then he says, if you're looking for me, then let these guys go. He probably didn't even have to say that because them guys had probably already scattered. All the disciples of beef feet, they're gone. Except for Peter and John. So they take Jesus and they tie his hands behind his back and they start taking him into town. And they're going to go to, the high priest Caiaphas in his house. And for some reason, this guy's house has a dungeon in it, which that's cool, I guess, whatever, man cave. But he brings Jesus into this man cave. Sorry, not man cave, into this dungeon. And this is where they have that mock trial, right? But Peter and John, they're following behind. And I know they're hiding in the woods and they're probably ducking behind trees and doing whatever they got to do. They're following this crowd. When they get into the courtyard, it's a busy courtyard. Lots of people are coming and going. There's this fire out in the middle. These people are standing around the fire, and there's probably some guards out there. So he sneaks up, or him, Peter and John, they sneak up and they get there by the fire. Now, Peter can see what's going on. He can kind of see into the dungeon there, and he can see Jesus, and he's trying to figure out, what am I going to do next? What's happening here? But it seems like he's looking for a chance that maybe, just maybe, he can bust Jesus out. I mean, that takes some courage, right? I mean, Peter, I don't think Peter's a coward by any stretch of the word, right? He's the man. He's going to save Jesus. He wants to die for him. I think he really was ready to die for Jesus that night. But while Peter's standing by the fire, let me read you some scripture. Here's what happened. A servant girl noticed him in the firelight and began staring at him. Finally, she said, this was one of Jesus' followers. But Peter, he denied it. Woman, I don't even know him. After a while, someone else looked at him and said, you must be one of them. No, man, I'm not, Peter retorted. About an hour later, someone else insisted, this must be one of them because he's a Galilean too. But Peter said, man, I don't know what you are talking about. And immediately, he's still mid-sentence, still speaking, the rooster crowed. And at that moment, he turned and he looked at Jesus. Suddenly, the Lord's words flashed through Peter's mind. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even know me. Imagine the pain. I mean, he runs away, crying, weeping bitterly. What do you think Peter's feeling in that moment? Shame, guilt, failure, betrayal. He's not only deserted Jesus, but he's like, I don't even know the guy. He's denied him. Here's what I think we're supposed to get from this event. I think we're supposed to recognize that we've been Simon Peter all along the way. Simon is you. Simon is me. Simon Peter. And I know most of us probably haven't ever actually just been, I don't know Jesus, never heard of him. No. I don't go to church. Nope, not me. I know most of us probably haven't denied him like that, but we have denied him by our actions. We have denied him by our inactions. We've all denied him. And there have been moments where in our lifetime, in your lifetime, that there's something that needed to be said or done by a Christian. Something that we believe, because we believe in Jesus, we should have stood up and we should have done something. You know, I've been there. I told you guys that story about me walking down the sidewalk in San Diego. Best shape of my life, just graduated boot camp. See these two guys beating somebody up. Oh my gosh, I better go. One of my finest moments, right? There's a story about a grandfather. He's reading one of his grandsons is reading his journal. Talks about a lynching he come up to one night. He said he was horrified by what he saw, the hate, the torture, the insanity. But he stood there, a follower of Jesus, and did nothing. He said nothing. Every time Jesus needs you or me to do something, to speak up for him, and we don't do it, we deny him. Have you denied him? Really, I'm not asking if you have. I'm asking how have you denied him? Because I know we all have in one way or another. We're not perfect. No one is. So why do you think all four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, why do you think they talk about this story of Peter's betrayal? I mean, Peter, Simon Peter, he's supposed to be one of the superheroes of the Old Testament, right? He's supposed to be one of the guys of the early church. So why do they tell his most embarrassing moment over and over again? Why do they do that? I mean, listen, all four gospel writers include this and retell this story because Peter told this story. Peter told this story over and over and over. Every time Peter got to be able to preach a sermon, he told this story. Every time he gathered with a bunch of new Christians, he told this story. Every time he gathered with a group of people that he thought should know Jesus and learn about him for the first time, needed to know this story. Peter talked about it all the time. So why? Why would Peter tell this story? I don't even like mentioning that I walked by that guy on the street, and that's, I mean, logical people probably would have just called 911, but I don't think I had a cell phone back then. But I don't even like telling that story. Imagine this. He denied Jesus 3 times, denied him, and he tells the story. So why does Peter tell this? And I think it's so that all people can know that if you failed and you've denied Jesus, you can be forgiven. There's hope for you too. Because after the resurrection, Jesus comes to Peter and he asks him 3 times, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know I love you. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know I love you. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. And I think this was Jesus' way of letting him know that he was forgiven. It's okay. I forgive you for what you did. Part of what I want us to recognize is that this is our story. We've denied Jesus. Another part of what I want you to recognize is that telling our story and the moments that we feel embarrassed about, that we're scared to tell people about, the things that are our hurts, our habits, our hang-ups, the things that drag us down, that separate us from Christ, those things, the story of how we are restored can help other people. Just hearing those stories can help other people know that they can be restored too. What I've learned from preaching this short amount of time that I've been doing it here is that sometimes when I tell the stories, the ones I'm embarrassed of, that's when I get the most comments. That's when I think you guys are catching the most or learning the most. When I tell you when I get it right, it's kind of like, oh, you're a pastor, you're supposed to, right? It's those hard stories, those difficult stories that you get, thanks for telling us about how you got that speeding ticket. Thanks for telling me about how you got so mad at your son you punched a hole in the bedroom door. Thanks for telling me about the mistakes that you made, because when you tell us those things, it makes you human. It makes you like me. And I feel like if you can mess up and you can be redeemed, so can I. That's what I hear. And I think that's what Simon Peter was doing here in telling his story. We're all going to deny Jesus at some point, but that does not have to be the end of the story. We all can be forgiven. 2 weeks ago, I told my story at the Joplin campus about my struggles with addiction and how I kind of got through that with this church, actually, with my wife and being able to be redeemed. And I think it's in sharing that story has allowed me to be able to be an influence for hundreds of people that come through our Celebrate Recovery every week. It's through telling our story that we're able to help other people. Our lead pastor, Aaron Brown, over the years has talked about his struggle with depression and how he's worked through that. And in hearing that, people have come to him and said, man, I didn't think we were supposed to talk about that. I didn't think I could be healed. But hearing that from you, I'm able to be healed. It's some of the people that teach our financial classes. They have been through struggles with their budgets and money, and they've hit rock bottom, so to speak, when it comes to budgeting, and they've recovered and figured out a way to get back on top. And those are some of the best teachers. So listen, you're likely to deny Jesus from time to time. You really are. But Jesus is the Lord of second chances. And God can use our failures, our faults, our hurts, our habits, our shortcomings. He can use all of our embarrassing moments for his glory. If you let him. You got to let him in. You got to accept the gift that he offers. And I believe that is the story of Simon Peter. And for today, that is the good news. In the name of the Father who created you, and the Son who saves you, and the Holy Spirit who sustains you.